Good morning, everyone. I think it's a good moment to start this session. So welcome to our 9th Tabadul webinar. Today we are focusing on fighting disinformation, and we will be exploring different tools and strategies for fact-checking. My name is Patricia Carbonell. I'm the head of communications at Revolve. Revolve is a media group communicating sustainability issues, and today I'm representing the AMWAS team. To set the scene a little bit on what is AMWAS, for those who don't know the initiative, it's a non-profit initiative, member-based, that brings together different stakeholders around the Mediterranean, from research centers to policy to civil society to media, which is our core, bringing the journalists, the creatives, the content creators together to improve reporting on water ecosystems in the Mediterranean, and to find different tools and strategies to keep people better informed, and of course promoting sustainable solutions along the way, and also enabling meaningful collaborations. We have different members that are supporting these activities, but also media partners that help us to bring a community together to do so. So today we are in the Tabadul space. Tabadul means exchange in Arabic, and we bring this kind of like multilinguistic approach because we consider that a strength in the Mediterranean as well, of diversity, and of course that it's something that we want to bring to the table, south to north and west to east. It's good to exchange, and this is a space designed basically to inspire knowledge sharing and to share best practices in communication. And hopefully we can bring relevant themes that we believe that are key to discuss these days, such as disinformation, which is something that we are living with this planetary crisis, with these moments of instability in which these disinformation strategies or tools are important to tackle with fact-checking. And today we have amazing experts that will tell us how they do it and bring some real case studies that will inspire us and get closer to this matter. So without further hesitation, I think today we will follow the agenda that you see on screen. We will start by a short introduction and case studies from the fact-checking experts on debunking information, followed by a roundtable with some questions that we would like to discuss with them. And then we will have a Q&A, opening the floor for you to share your questions. You can do it from the beginning, actually, put your questions on the Q&A section, or you can also drop them in the chat. And in the Q&A part, towards the end, you can raise your hand and you can voice your questions or reflections or comments. We would like to make this participatory and hear from you. So without further ado, I would like to introduce the first speaker, Samuel Alan, a journalist from Maldita. Maldita is a non-profit foundation in Spain that builds public trust by fighting disinformation and promoting transparency through journalism, education, and research. So Samuel, over to you to share insights on effective fact-checking approaches on climate communication. Thank you for being here today. Very much appreciated.
Hi everyone, thank you Patricia for the introduction, and it's a real pleasure to be here today. So thank you very much for inviting myself and the Maldita team to talk to you a little bit about some of the work that we're doing and some of the techniques that we're bringing to fighting disinformation and particularly climate-related disinformation within the Mediterranean region. I am the Projects and Impact Officer or Coordinator at Maldita. So I'm not directly a journalist. I actually work more in the design and implementation of various different projects. But it actually speaks to the wider, more diverse work that Maldita is increasingly doing in the field. Obviously today, and I will be talking about fact-checking journalism, but some of the stuff that we'll be touching on will go a little bit beyond journalism in a direct sense, because increasingly we've come to understand that disinformation, there's no silver bullet for disinformation, and we need to be fighting it on multiple different fronts. So the core area of the work that we do at Maldita is our journalistic work, our fact-checking work, which I'll be talking about mainly today. But we also do have a number of other areas of activity, including media literacy education, public policy work, academic research, and as well as increasingly technological development and community building, which again I'll also be touching on quite heavily today. So that's just a little bit of introduction to me and to some of the work that Maldita is doing. But now I'll turn to the main subject of today. Let me just share my screen. Okay. I hope everyone can see that. Brilliant. Okay, so we were asked to focus in on one specific hoax or fact-checking case. I've actually kind of cheated a little bit and gone a little bit broader than that, because what I wanted to talk today is about something that's been in the news a lot lately, and I'm sure you're all aware of it. And it's an issue that's been heavily affected by disinformation, and that is the serious floods that followed the Dana around the southeastern region of Spain, primarily around Valencia, which has taken many lives, but also in the process has become a key source of disinformation, which we at Maldita are still tackling on a day-to-day basis. But before I get into the details of that, I just wanted to start with a little pop quiz question. I don't know how much interaction we can have. Maybe I don't know if you can put it in the questions and answers section or in the chat or something like that. But first question of the day is this map. This is a map that we've seen a lot over the last few weeks, at least in our newsroom. And so I wanted to ask you guys, what do you think this map represents? I'm going to make it a little bit easier. Okay, I've got some multiple choice questions for you here. Okay, so what do you think this map represents? Is it A, are these blue dots on the map the dams around Valencia that have been destroyed by the Spanish government in recent years? Are they B, reservoirs around Valencia that have been destroyed in accordance with EU regulation in recent years? Or are they C, certain areas where flooding has taken lives during the Dana phenomenon? So any ideas there? Feel free. Okay, I think the chat is disabled, so feel free to write in the questions and answers. Any ideas, A, B, or C? Just get a general idea of what people think. Lots of B's coming up here. Okay. All right, okay. Okay, so a number of B's and a couple of C's in there as well. All right, so we're thinking it's maybe B or C. Well, apologies to have fooled you, but unfortunately, it was a trick question. They are all false. None of this map does not represent any of these hoaxes. However, it has been used to disseminate in different settings each one of these false disinformation narratives that have been circulating over the last few weeks since Dana has occurred, but none of them are true. This map, in fact, is a map, and all those dots show where river barriers actually do exist around the Valencia region, not where they've been destroyed or removed or taken lives. They are actually a map of where they do exist. And in fact, it was a map created by the European project AMBER, mapping barriers on European rivers. But this image was decontextualized and taken out of its setting, removed of any sort of labeling or anything like that, and then shared in multiple different contents across different platforms to propagate ultimately false narratives around the Dana outbreaks, and so a lot of confusion, discord, and distrust. And generally speaking, Maldita, we've been tackling disinformation for 5 to 10 years now. We've been working through a number of different crises, which I'm sure you're all aware of, the disinformation crisis following the pandemic, following the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and a number of other crises. But over the last few weeks, when confronting Dana, we can honestly say we have never seen anything quite like this. This is something, it's huge, basically. The disinformation crisis that has emerged following the flooding in Valencia we've never seen anything on this scale in terms of scope, in terms of coordination, and in terms of complexity. We have been inundated with hoaxes and various pieces of disinformation that our newsroom has been struggling to keep up with on a daily basis. Just to give you one example, or give you a sort of general statistic, which kind of is a testament to this. On one day, so we operate a WhatsApp chatbot where people like you and general people can send in disinformation tips. So if they find something online that they think might be suspicious or false, they can send it to us, and then our newsroom can fact check it. And on one single day during the last few weeks, that tip line was receiving over 9,000 tips in one single day. That is obscene. It's immense, the scale and scope, but also the coordination complexity of the campaign that we have been confronting over the last few weeks following the Dana. Nevertheless, and this is something that we're starting to do at Maldita on a more comprehensive scale, is not just trying to confront the individual hoaxes, but also trying to get at the wider narratives and the patterns that we can find when we are confronted with such a huge wave of disinformation. And we have been able to identify a number of different layers of disinformation. Okay, and in fact, we've identified 3 levels of disinformation within the campaign that has emerged following the flooding in Valencia. The first is a group of hoaxes, which we're kind of terming the social hoaxes. Okay, so these are hoaxes that essentially try to sow confusion. They feed off the distress and the confusion that follows a natural disaster or a climate crisis like the one following the flooding, and they just try to build on that and create distrust and discord. And so that people, you might be seeing a video or a photo and you might share it out of the goodness of your heart for the concern of the people affected, for friends and family who are there, but ultimately you are sharing something that is false and it's fake. One good example of this, for instance, is this video that appeared a few weeks ago, and it shows a street flooded with cars floating down it. There's people stranded on top of cars floating down the river, and it spread very widely with people showing, "Oh my God, look what's happening in Valencia! How awful!" But actually, this video was not taken this year. It wasn't even taken in Valencia. This video is actually from Zaragoza, and it was recorded in 2023, so last year. And it's not to say that there's not been horrific scenes happening in Valencia, but what these kind of hoaxes do is they add false and misleading images and videos to a situation that is already under a lot of pressure and to a situation that is already creating a lot of distress, and they try to feed and foment that distress to increasingly encourage you to distrust official sources. The second level of disinformation within the campaigns that we have identified is what is called the political lie. Okay, so these are hoaxes that generally focus on trying to push people to one or another political ideology. They're very ideological in their approach. They tend to attack politicians or political narratives that are appearing and push people who see it to support one or another view. One example here is this disinformation this hoax which actually emerged from what a politician actually said. So this was a claim by the president of Valencia, Mazón, who's been under a lot of criticism over the last few weeks, in which he claimed that a central government agency actually disactivated a number of alerts that were emerging in the week before the flooding. But that claim is completely untrue. And in fact, the power to issue such alerts actually comes from the local autonomous agency, which he is in charge of. And it did, in fact, issue an alert on the 29th of October when the Dana was first having its impact. Meanwhile, the central government agency, which he refers to, came out stating that no deactivation was ever issued over the previous weeks. So here we see a politician, in fact, trying to spread a lie to cover his to cover his sort of case. Meanwhile, it pushes increasing criticism on the central government, which is the left. We have the Socialist Party in government here in Spain, and then the president of Valencia is actually from PP, which is the right-wing government. And so these different political parties and people who support these parties tend to sort of take advantage of situations like this, as I'm sure you're all aware, and often spreading disinformation to try and place the blame on one side or another, while also pushing you, the consumer of this information, into their arms and into their views. Then the final layer of disinformation that we've identified, and this can often be one of the most dangerous, and it's one that's gaining a lot more currency over recent years, has been the conspiracy. Okay, so this is where we're starting to get into much broader narratives, and basically trying to create a wider theory that is not based on scientific fact to explain a situation, and ultimately this often feeds into wanting to attack or undermine an institution, a way of life, or a scientific theory. One key example here during the Dana has been this widely disseminated conspiracy theory, accusing that the Dana was caused by the government of Morocco using geoengineering techniques, particularly through a program that has been the center of a lot of disinformation campaigns for a number of years, the HARP program. But this theory, as you can probably imagine, has no scientific basis. While some sort of geoengineering programs do exist, science and scientific experts have clearly stated that none of these programs have the potential to cause sort of climatic event like that resulting from the Dana, and B, none of these programs are related to the HARP program, which actually stands for High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, and is ultimately focused on studying the ionosphere, which is the outer layer of the Earth's sphere and has absolutely nothing to do with weather events. But these theories, as you can see, can be used to attack governments, to attack other countries, and to attack our way of life. Other ones to particularly undermine, such as that climate change is a lie, created by the elites, and so on and so forth. Okay, so we've been working with, as you can see, a huge amount of disinformation covering a whole scope of different issues, but we can already start to see how it works at different levels, and it builds up. It starts with that social hoax creating the disarray, then it leads into the political lie, and taking advantage of the confusion caused, and then ultimately builds into wider conspiracy theories, which really threaten the way we think about the world and the way we trust and live within our communities. And ultimately, what has become increasingly apparent during the recent Dana crisis, and something that we've been researching a lot over the last few years, and with this recent campaign, has become very clear that it's not only the scale of this that is concerning, but it's the degree of coordination. There's no denying that these campaigns and the way that they operate, the disinformation and the way it's spread, is organized. This isn't a small case of a number of dislocated different hoaxes. It is organized, it's coordinated, and there's definitely people behind this who want to do us harm. How do we know that? Of course, well, there's a number of different things that kind of lead us to think this. Firstly, is just the precision and focus of individual hoaxes that appear within a matter of hours on specific issues. We've identified over 100 different cases of a hoax about a number of dead people found in a car park in Valencia, but actually not one single death has been confirmed from that car park, and it's all been built on lies. But within a day or so, we identified close to 100 different hoaxes around that issue, and to see so many different sources of hoaxes emerging on one specific issue leads you to suggest that this isn't people all thinking randomly the same thing at the same time, but individual groups are coming up with these hoaxes to spread them on a comprehensive scale. Another thing that shows a degree of organization is the existence of bot networks. I'm sure you're all very aware of the existence of bots, particularly on platforms like X or Twitter. And during the Dana outbreak, we saw a number of bots, automated and semi-automatic accounts, many of them registered in India, massively publishing and responding to tweets about the Dana. And many of these often spreading disinformation and even promoting violence on a considerable scale. It's actually quite easy to identify these kind of bots through a simple search on Twitter and then reviewing the publication patterns, and you can see very common patterns publishing about the same things, and they tend to recycle tweets that are already existent on the platform as well. But they enable disinformation to basically amplify on a huge scale, and often through a quite coordinated approach. Another area that shows us how organized this is the famous X or Twitter blue tick. Now, the blue tick back in the days pre-Musk obviously referred to a verified account. But nowadays, anyone can get the blue tick if you just buy the Twitter premium account. And this basically, and we've noticed that a number of these Twitter blue tick accounts have been key sources of disinformation. So in that way, the platform is ultimately directly profiting from the spread of disinformation as these paid blue tick accounts spread disinformation, and through the blue tick approach, they're able to optimize their reach and capitalize on what we used to believe in the blue tick as a valid or verified account, and now actually can be, and often it's quite easy to buy these accounts and then spread them on a huge scale. And then finally, and this is sort of the most sort of clear case of an organized campaign, is during the Dana outbreak, we identified a number of Russian coordinated, what is termed as FIMI campaigns. FIMI stands for Foreign Information Manipulation and Interference. And these essentially refers to disinformation campaigns coordinated by other governments, and in Europe, as I'm sure many of you are aware, either Russian coordinated or close to the Russian government media outlets spread disinformation very widely. And this is one case where a viral video hoax of a long convoy of cars, which claimed that this convoy was the king's escort when he visited Valencia, the king of Spain's escort when he visited Valencia a few weeks ago. But that was not the case. This convoy is a convoy of police cars going down to Valencia to provide support. But it was this hoax was amplified massively by Russian-controlled media sources across many different countries and many different languages, and it actually got associated to riots that occurred later with the anger towards the king and the Prime Minister of Spain, and ultimately are a sign of Russian coordinated efforts to sow chaos and distrust on an international scale around a crisis evolving within Spain. And then the next question I suppose you ask is, okay, if it is so organized, then why do this? Why are they doing this? And ultimately, not wanting to raise too many alarm bells, but ultimately the only conclusion to be made is that we're under attack, and ultimately they just want to break our trust in everything. They want to break our trust in the government and in government agencies, such as hoaxes accusing the meteorological agency here in Spain of not doing anything or not releasing any alerts, which is not true. They want to even break our trust in NGOs and civil society. Quite a number of different hoaxes came out accusing the Red Cross of doing absolutely nothing or stealing money from people who donated, which again, all of that not true. And ultimately, they want to undermine and break our trust within local communities, among our neighbors and friends and loved ones by spreading lies that counteract the wider narratives and trust that we normally have in people and what they have and say and do. For instance, a number of narratives have been spread attacking migrant communities, stealing aid following the Dana outbreak, and ultimately undermining and trying to challenge stories coming or shared by people actually affected in the different areas. So it's quite a terrifying sort of landscape to take back and take stock of, but do not lose all hope. There is still hope yet, and that's why I want to turn on the last little bit now about what we are doing to fight back. I mean, when we're confronted with campaigns on this scale, with this level of coordination, because I mean, you know, I'm not quite sure how to refer to them. We can refer to them as the bad guys, maybe, if we want to. But every time a campaign goes out, every time a crisis comes out, they are learning. They are improving their approach. They're improving their tactics. They become more coordinated and more effective in disseminating lies and disinformation. So we also need to learn, and we also need to work out how we can improve our response to fighting back. And one of the key techniques that we've been implementing in Maldita over the last year or so, and has proven really effective during the Dana crisis, has been fighting the narrative, not just the hoax. So as I mentioned earlier, there's lots of different hoaxes, but gradually we can start to see patterns, connections between the hoaxes, and identifying not just different layers, but actual specific narratives. What do I mean by narrative? Well, narratives in general are just stories, explanations that we tell to ourselves to help us understand the world. They're a way of relating with the world. So a disinformation narrative is basically a subjective and simplistic explanation that is of the world, but it's based, rather than on a series of facts that we put together, it's based on an accumulation of different hoaxes. And ultimately, they can have a huge impact on shaping how we understand and relate to the world. But if we are understanding and related to the world in a way that is based on things that are not true, it can lead to a whole host of different consequences. Of course, distrust of people telling us something different, but also it can threaten health, it can threaten communities, and ultimately it can be a challenge to our democracies and our society. One example of a narrative that we identified, and this is a narrative that's been in existence for many years now. It's not a new narrative, but that's one of the things about narratives, is that they evolve over time, and they're quite broad, generalized narratives that are easily adapted to new events that emerge, and quickly explain something, especially when they're complex issues. When you're provided with a nice, easy explanation, it's really easy to believe and lean into, which makes it all the more challenging for us to counter. This is one narrative that we identified, which I've already mentioned, which is the technology from the HARP program. Remember that research program that had nothing to do with controlling the weather? Well, this is a narrative, a disinformation narrative, that accuses this HARP program of manipulating the climate and provoking natural disasters. And we've seen it on a number of different occasions, following a number of different climate disasters. And so then it was easily adapted to a number of specific individual hoaxes during the Dana outbreak. For instance, this one here, which accuses ultimately generally that the Dana crisis, the Dana outbreak, was a product of meteorological attack by the HARP program. Another one here, which accuses it, as we saw earlier, accusing Morocco of provoking the Dana using HARP technology. And then another one here of an image that appeared of a giant ship that people said was from the HARP program, and it was spotted on the coast of Valencia just days before the Dana, and therefore it must have been a HARP attack, when actually in reality this ship had nothing to do with the HARP program, and it wasn't even spotted near Valencia. I think in one case it was off the coast of China, and in another case it was in the Caribbean. But you can see how these individual hoaxes feed into, and they basically feed and cultivate this wider narrative, which we will not stop at the end of the Dana crisis. It will continue to evolve, and in future cases of flooding or drought, this narrative will continue to appear, only reinforced by a new series of hoaxes that emerge. So as you can see, if we're just confronting the individual hoaxes here, we're going to hopefully make some progress, but we're not really going to be able to take down the overall narrative. It's going to be really challenging, because it increasingly this narrative increasingly becomes how people and how individuals come to see the world. And if we don't address this overarching issue, then we're not going to have much luck tackling these. And then on the other side, when confronting a huge campaign on a huge scale, and we can't get to every single hoax that's out there, if we can attack the narrative and if we can debunk this narrative, it's much easier. And basically, one stone and multiple hoaxes, we can attack and bring down a number of related hoaxes, so that if you know, for instance, that the HARP program has nothing to do with weather manipulation, it cannot provoke natural disasters. If you see any of these individual hoaxes, you're instantly going to doubt it. You're instantly going to go, well, that can't be true. So that's the work that we're increasingly trying to do in Maldita. Of course, we're still doing our fact-checking of individual hoaxes, which is important work. But if we can address and identify and counter the overarching narratives, we're going to have a much better and a much stronger impact in the longer term on these wider disinformation campaigns that are increasingly growing in scope and impact. Just a little bit on the different techniques that we employ, and I know hopefully in the Q&A session we'll be able to go into these a little bit further. But of course, at the core of all our work, whether we're attacking hoaxes, narratives, or different layers of disinformation, we are always employing our rigorous journalistic methodology, which is rooted on basically, we have in order to prioritize our work, we base it on analyzing the virality of a hoax or a narrative and the level of danger. I mean, could this threaten people's lives? Could this promote hate speech and so on? And from there, we're able to sort of prioritize our work, especially when we're working on a huge scale. And then, of course, we base it on multiple sources and implement a hugely sort of rigorous program. I can share the link to the Maldita methodology in the chat after this, so you can get a deeper dive into the foundation of all the journalistic work that we do. Another key area of our work is our collaboration with technology. So within Maldita, we've been working over the recent years to develop a number of technological tools that improve the response of our newsroom and the efficiency of the work within our newsroom to particularly identify and detect as well as analyze disinformation. And one of those, related to what I've been talking about today, is our narratives dashboard. Okay, so we have a huge disinformation database where we've got all the disinformation that we've identified over all the years we've been working, registered in that database. And so we have implemented this dashboard, which mobilizes artificial intelligence, particularly generative AI, to analyze the disinformation data sets that we have. And basically, using large language models, it extracts some examples of narratives that it has found within our disinformation content. So this little image you see here on the left of the hub, this is what appears on our narratives dashboard once it's done an analysis of the content, and it's already identified this issue relating to the HARP program. Then our journalistic team, and there's always a human in the loop whenever we're working with technology within our newsroom, because obviously we can't fully rely on technology. There does always need to be some human oversight. And then our team investigates these narratives, and that investigation is based on a wide range of scientific literature on narratives and disinformation narratives to understand better how these narratives work, how they are spread, and how they feed into people's understandings about the world. Then we build on this technology, and this technology, the artificial intelligence and the investigation, is then integrated into a technological tool that is easily used and employed within our newsroom, and we use it on a daily basis now. And ultimately, once that narrative has been identified by our dashboard, that's when the journalistic work really begins. And based on comprehensive and rigorous data, we debunk the narrative and produce an article that or a social media content or however format it may be to counter the overarching narrative. This narratives dashboard and wider disinformation dataset is fed by our WhatsApp chatbot, which I mentioned earlier, which was receiving over 9,000 tips during one day during the Dana. You can use this chatbot if you come across a content that you think is suspicious. You can send it to us through to this number, and hopefully, if we've already debunked it, you will automatically receive the debunked article or the debunked narrative. And if we haven't, then we will get to it. And hopefully, as soon as we have debunked it, you will automatically receive the verified content. Other areas of our work, and this is really, really key, we believe that citizens and the general public should be at the core of everything that we do. So they are integrated across our whole workflow, from the very beginning to detecting disinformation through our WhatsApp chatbot, but also quite heavily within debunking our disinformation. So we operate a program, our Superpowers program. This is a community of over 3,000 different experts across various disciplines, from climate science to law to political science, you name it, nature, any kind of expertise. We have it in our database, and these individuals basically donate their knowledge, they donate their expertise to us. So when our journalists need to debunk something that requires a verified source or a verified expert, we can look through our database and call on one of the experts registered there to reach out to them. And then finally, we are taking the fight to social media, which is obviously, as many of you are aware, where disinformation spreads so widely. And we are working on, obviously, Instagram and TikTok. We've also set up a new brand beyond the Maldita brand, which is called Factus. And this is primarily for content on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube Shorts, where we are adapting our fact-checking and journalistic content to engaging, very sort of short, snappy videos that have had a lot of success on these channels, reaching some videos reaching over 1 million views in one go. And we believe that this is a really effective way of getting the word out there, particularly on platforms where they are flooded with disinformation. And so if we can counter that, then we need to speak in the formats and the language that particularly young people are speaking today, and are often the targets of some of these hoaxes. And then finally, what can you do? I'll share these in the chat afterwards. But it's also important that on an individual level, we should be doing our part to protect ourselves from disinformation ultimately. And there are two key things I want to bring up here. Firstly, we as individuals within our brain are very prone to believing things that are not true based on our own biases and our own beliefs. And so it's important to counter those, and there's a number of steps you can take there. Keep in mind your own bias. What political persuasion do you have? What opinions do you have about certain issues? Okay, know those, and if you see something that confirms those, just be sure that it's coming from a valid source. We also tend to believe things that we see often. So when we're overwhelmed by a huge amount of disinformation on one issue, for instance, the number of the hoax about many people found dead in a car park, if we see a lot of that, we're more likely to believe it. So if you see a lot of it, a lot of something, then again, just double check that it is coming from a valid source. Disinformation often plays on our individual relationships. So if you're getting a piece of information from a family member or a friend, that does not mean that it's necessarily real. It doesn't mean that you have to distrust your family members, but just be careful, especially when they're forwarding things from WhatsApp or social media. It's important to double check those things to protect yourself, and then also the family member, who is probably not an evil disinformer by any means. They're probably very honestly sharing that content. But so then it's important to not just protect you, but also your wider community. Pictures and videos are often a key source. They're things that our brain loves, pictures and visual cues. So bad actors tend to use them to deceive them. So if you see something with a lot of visual elements, then double check that visual element is valid. And then finally, and this has been really a big issue during the Dana crisis, be wary of contents that appeal to our emotions, that feed on fear, concern, also even humor and comedy. Just be aware of those contents that if it makes you feel a strong emotion, then probably it's worth double checking that it is a valid source. And how can you do that checking? Have a look at who publishes it. If it doesn't have a source, then probably it's not true. If it does have a source, then do you know that source? Is it a trusted source? Don't just read the headline, read the full text. Headlines can be very deceiving. Be careful of fake quotes. This is quite a common one. Things put in fake quotes to sort of pretend to be a source when in reality it's not. Is it humor? Is it being satirical? We see a lot of these sort of satire news sites coming around that can be very amusing, but often rather unwittingly become sources of disinformation. And be careful of emergency alerts, things that say, oh, watch out, emergency, beware, especially those spread on WhatsApp and social media channels. These are key sources, and always check if there is an official source. That's all for me. I think I might have gone a little bit over time there, so apologies. But I hope it was interesting. And yeah, thank you very much again to everyone for having me here. And I look forward to your questions afterwards.
Well, thank you, Samuel. That was really, really insightful and plenty of lessons learned. It really resonated because, especially coming from Valencia, I experienced this case firsthand during the past 2 weeks. And indeed, the spread of disinformation was very fast-paced and clearly organized. And it was kind of like everywhere, like from social media, of course, but also in written media and even in primetime TV programs. Like we see this information now taking the stage and really getting to millions of people. So it's a big challenge that we have, but it's been really nice to hear from you how you are trying to tackle this, no? And giving us some tips to do so. Definitely for us, it's Maldita is our go-to place for fact-checking, and we will keep doing so. And thank you for sharing these WhatsApps and other resources for us to keep up on this, because it's really important, as you say, for democracy and for trust and for really believing in societies. So thank you. We will continue in the Q&A session. So everyone, if you have questions for Samuel, put it in the Q&A. So we will take them after the session now that we have with Magdalene Coco. And she's a fact-checker journalist from AFP and a member of MEDMO, the Mediterranean Digital Media Observatory, which focuses on addressing disinformation in Greece, Cyprus, and Malta. But we will get Magdalene to explain us more through her experiences and practices in combating disinformation in the Mediterranean region. So Magdalene, thank you so much for being here as well. And the floor is yours, please.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Patricia, for the introduction and also for having me here today. And many thanks to all the participants. Hope that we will have a fruitful discussion, and please feel free to ask any questions you may have at the end of this presentation. So to introduce myself, my name is Magdalene. I am a fact checker for Agence France Presse. And I am covering disinformation circulating in Greece and Cyprus. Just to mention that AFP has one of the largest fact-checking network worldwide, with 150 journalists working in 26 languages all over the world. And we are also a member of MEDMO, which is the Mediterranean Digital Media Observatory, which is a regional hub of EDMO, the European Digital Media Observatory, a project launched in 2022. And MEDMO, the countries including MEDMO is Greece, Cyprus, and Malta. Basically, we are facing similar challenges regarding this information. And one of the goals of MEDMO is to bring together fact-checkers, journalists, media organizations, academics also, in order to exchange ideas and to share knowledge on how to combat misinformation. Could we proceed to the next slide, please? Yeah, thank you. So for today's presentation, I've chosen a really viral example related to environmental and climate disinformation. So to begin with, basically this is a very typical example of how people use selective data in order to twist facts about climate change and climate science. So to give you an overview, It is a climate-related example, as I mentioned, but to give you an overview of the situation of the weather condition in Greece last summer, I have to say that Greece experienced really high temperatures during June and July mainly. And in September 2024, the National Observatory of Athens said that this summer was the hottest ever summer recorded in Greece. With June and July being the hottest months since 1960, when the records began, and August was the second hottest month behind August 2020. So we had really high temperatures, sunny days, and little to no rain at all. So in this context, social media users started sharing a claim according to which basically the claim that the high temperatures of 1965 in the Greek city of Larissa prove that climate change is not real. Just for your information, this city is a city where there are generally high temperatures and high levels of humidity as well. So the users made the comparison between 1965 and 2024, saying that, why are you saying that now we have climate change and climate change influences people's lives while we had experienced high temperatures many years ago? Which, as we found out, this is a misleading comparison, but I will explain in the next slide. So why we decided to debunk the claim? First of all, we have like specific criteria based on which we decide if we will verify or not a claim. One of them is the impact a claim has to the audience. So this was a really viral claim, widely circulated in Greece and Cyprus as well, and it had over 1,500 Facebook shares, which means, as we can understand, for a country with approximately 11 million, with a population of approximately 11 million people, is a lot. One of the second reasons why, another reason why we decided to verify this claim was that we found it is really harmful for people, because it can make people question science, and it can also undermine the existing strong evidence that climate change is real. And as we all know. Could we proceed to the next slide, please? Thank you. So since we decided that it deserves our time and it's worth working on the story, we starting thinking of how we will debunk it. So social media users posted this a small press clip that you can see on the top right of the slide. And this is a press clip of an old newspaper, and the headline says that the temperature in Larissa is 45 degrees under shadow. So first thing we had to do was to find this press clip to confirm that this is real. So we searched in the digital archives of Greek newspapers and periodicals. And to be honest, after many hours of searching, we found out that it wasn't that real. So the second thing we had to do was to confirm the temperature and the weather conditions of that specific date. And because in Greece, basically we contacted the Greek Meteorological Service, but they informed us that they don't have an official open source database where we can find like specific weather conditions of a specific past date. So that was one of the challenges we had to face and find alternative ways to verify the claim. So an idea was to look for other press coverage of that time, which we did, basically looking again on the digital archives of newspapers. And we found other press clips confirming that the weather and the temperature in that specific area was indeed 45 degrees. The second thing, second step, I would say, was to contact some experts. As we generally do in this kind of stories, we consulted two independent experts. We think that it's really important to find at least two experts for a topic of such importance. So we showed them the press clip and we told them what the claim was, what people said, and we asked them if this comparison is reasonable, if we can say that there is no climate change because high temperatures were, because Greece experienced high temperatures many years ago, and so on. And basically what they told us is that this comparison is misleading, because the most important thing and is that we have to pay attention to the fact that nowadays global warming has made extreme weather events even more frequent, stronger, and more intense. And that nowadays we have even more higher average temperatures. So we cannot isolate a specific incident of high temperatures and say that climate change is not real. Besides the quotes from the experts, we found some additional data, such as studies and reports, because we wanted to provide, first of all, a general context of the climate change, but also a specific context for Greece, which means basically one of the most, let's say, important studies for our story was one of 2023, I think. It was from a Greek research group. And the researchers had concluded, that by 2050, Greece will experience even more intense and frequent extreme weather events, that rainfalls will decrease to 10 to 30%, and that high temperatures will increase by 15 to 20 days per year. So this was like really strong background evidence, but also additional evidence to all the other data we had. I've also, I would like also to mention some of the challenges we faced, which is like, I would say these are general challenges we face as fact checkers on our daily workflow, but these are also specific challenges for this topic. So one of them is that we usually face difficulties in getting responses from Greek public authorities and experts, which, as I know and as I've discussed with fact checkers from different parts of Europe, is not only an issue in Greece, but in many other countries. And I cannot be sure about the public authorities because this is just an observation. But for the experts, I would say that it's not that they are not willing to get back to us, or that sometimes they're not available. They are like super busy with research and academic stuff and so on. But I have the feeling that sometimes they are really tired of all these disinformation campaigns that are circulating the last few years, especially with vaccines, for example, or with chemtrails when speaking about climate-related disinformation and so on. So that's why I think that it's not always easy to approach them and reach out. The second challenge is that we don't have open source official databases in Greece for every topic, let's say. As I mentioned before, we don't have an official database, open source database for past weather conditions, which was a problem in the example I mentioned. But we do have, for example, for vaccines. So this is a challenge most of the times, and makes us find alternative ways to verify claim, which sometimes works, but other times it doesn't work, to be honest, because you need specific data to prove if something is false or if it is true. And last but not least, we always have to explain to our sources why fact-checking and verifying content is important, because most of the times when we reach out to an expert or to a source, we ask unusual questions, I would say, like it's not the traditional journalistic questions they are used to. So they find our questions really unusual or obvious or insane sometimes. And it has happened to me multiple times, experts to tell me that, why are you trying to verify this? People will believe whatever they want to believe, even if you like trying to convince them that this is false. But we always have to explain that we understand that this claim, a claim, for example, might be insane or weird, but we want to provide accurate information to the audience, and we want to be as precise as possible. So that's why we're trying to contact reliable sources. That's why we are contacting them. And yeah, also that's why we are asking obvious questions sometimes, because people should know from an expert, not from a journalist. We are just the people who write the story. So yes, this is on my side, but hope it was helpful, and please feel free to ask any question you might have.
Thank you so much, Magdalena. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A, or now we are coming towards the more open kind of floor for you to raise your hand as well and contribute. And we want to hear your voice if you want to ask any particular question to the speakers. It was really nice to hear from you as well, Magdalena, also considering the kind of Mediterranean, more regional perspective that you have working at MEDMO. So I was wondering if you have observed any emerging patterns on how climate misinformation is spread through in the Mediterranean compared to other regions, and what unique kind of like symptoms or challenges do you see?
Yeah, thanks for your question, Patricia. Basically, yes, we do have observed specific patterns, especially during summer, I would say, or spring. You know, in the Mediterranean, we have this Saharan dust coming from Africa, for example. So many people, when at least last year, we had like, I don't know if you've seen the images, but it was like yellow images, like it was, okay, it was really strange. So users claim that this is not Saharan dust, but this is poisonous chemicals that people of power want to spread for notorious malicious reasons, these kind of things. And this is also common with chemtrails. You know, these claims are often appearing in Greece, Cyprus, and Malta, I think. But okay, I speak more about Greece and Cyprus because this is the regions I'm covering. So yes, because we have really, you know, the climate in these countries is similar. The geographical position makes us feel more closer to each other, of course. So yes, this is, I don't remember your second question, Patricia. Could you please repeat?
No, I think that was it. And basically, if you have any unique challenges that you see from these emerging patterns, I think you mentioned them in your presentation. If you had anything related to this.
Okay, if I could add something to this.
Yes.
That we also see a lot of claims of people that deny solar and wind power. For example, last year we had many people claiming that wildfires, because we have problem in Greece with wildfires every year, that wildfires are set on purpose because the government want to free space for wind turbines. This is a real common thing in the area as well.
Thank you, Magdalene. And I have another question for Samuel. You mentioned there a few things that I'm interested in. One is on the, for example, the 3 levels of disinformation that you mentioned. One is political, no? And in your work, how do you tackle misinformation that comes from authority figures or official institutions, and how do you ensure public trust in these fact-checking efforts, no, when it comes from this side?
It's a good question, and ultimately, fact-checking as a general discipline within journalism started primarily within political fact-checking. So ultimately, its origins come from journalists checking the statements of politicians. Obviously, since then, it has evolved, and disinformation has covered a lot of different areas, and it comes from a lot of different sources. But still, on a day-to-day, one of the key sources of disinformation is politicians themselves trying to sell an agenda, or as we saw in the case of the Valencian president, trying to cover their case a little bit. But when it comes to transparency, there. Ultimately, and I think Magdalene's really touched on it in her presentation, which is like, our case often is don't just trust us as journalists, because journalists also can have agendas and stuff like that, but having sort of multiple different sources, multiple different, especially verified experts in your content, in the fact checking that we conduct. This is really important when dealing with scientific issues, because scientific issues can be very complex, and those complexities often are used by disinformers, even by some politicians, with wanting to sort of play on those, on the fact that people probably don't have a deep understanding of an issue, because we can't be experts in everything. So bringing in those expert voices and saying these are independent expert voices is really key. And then also leading onto that, and that word of independence is really important. So as a fact-checking organization, Magdalene obviously will know this, AFP and also the Medmo and wider initiatives, is the independence of journalism. We obviously, knowing that we are not associated to a political party or political ideology or institution, which can be quite challenging because we often get accused of being, paid by the government and so on and so forth. But having that independence is really key, and it's one of the key values of our work, particularly as fact-checking journalists. And also as part of that work, we're a member of a number of networks that basically verify this independence and also verify the quality of our work. The two sort of main ones that we're a part of is the International Fact-Checking Network, which is a network of over 100 different fact-checking organizations around the world, and they have a criteria of several, a code of principles, basically, for fact-checking work. And if you want to become a member of that network and be approved international fact-checker, you have to basically adhere to those principles and go under I think it's every year or every 2-year assessment of your principles. And then another network, which is on a regional level, the European Fact-Checking Standards Network, which is kind of the same thing, but for European organizations, which in fact AFP and Maldita were part of the European project to establish that network. And again, this network has a code of standards, and those standards basically are key standards of fact-checking journalism, which if you don't sort of complete them, then you won't be an approved fact checker of the network. And at the core of those principles and standards is always independence, and that's really key. If our independence is not clear, then we're not going to have much luck fact checking politicians, because then we're not going to be easily trusted by people consuming our content. I hope that answered your question.
Definitely. Thank you, Samuel. We have 2 questions from the audience. I'm going to give the floor to Rihab Abdal Mohsen, science writer from Egypt. I think you got your hand raised, Rihab. Now you are on mute. Hello.
Hi, how are you? I have a question. Basically, we are talking about Mediterranean, and I'm so interested in misinformation and disinformation. I don't know how to frame my question honestly, but this is basically about what's happening in the Mediterranean, the war that is going on in Lebanon and Gaza. And with every time we see wars, we see a huge number of misinformation. And specifically with this war, we saw it happening repeatedly from the Israeli side. And I saw also the sensitivity in the Western media on tackling this issue. I'm so interested on your work, Samuel, and I think Denise's work on how do you deal with this? How do you deal with the European sensitivity to criticize anything that comes from Israel, and how do you manage to deal with this? Thank you.
I could reply to this question if it's okay with you. Basically, since it's a really important politically and social issue as well, I will talk as a fact checker because this kind of topics is really hard to, basically it's really hard to verify claims concerning this kind of topics. First of all, because it's in a region that it might be close, but it's in another part of the world. So for example, at AFP, we have like journalists and contributors and other colleagues at the region. So we have our sources, let's say. But since we want to be as accurate as possible and as precise as possible, it's not easy to fact check a claim from this part of the world. Yes, so I guess it's a kind of different when we're talking about traditional journalism and news. Because, for example, when you're reporting, you have to be as quick as possible and as precise as possible as well. But as fact checkers, at least in our organization, we don't sacrifice, but we give priority to the accuracy of the events instead of the speed of the events. So yes, but yeah, I understand that it is a global issue, very difficult to handle with both as journalists and fact checkers. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's my point of view. Yes.
Can I jump in here as well? Just to build on what Magdalena was saying. Yeah, it is one of those things that's really, really difficult to, especially when it's in a, for instance, when it's in a war zone as well. Like it's always an issue for fact checkers to be able to you know, we don't have reporters on the ground to sort of always verify these claims, and sources are key. And I think most importantly as well, and this goes not just to sort of this issue, but wider issues, particularly when dealing with topics from other parts of the world, but is diversity of sources. And I don't just mean having lots of sources, but actually making sure, and apologies to put it this way, but making sure we don't always go to the same old white guy to be the expert on the issue, but actually having people with different perspectives, and not just perspectives, obviously, because in fact checking we're not providing perspective, we're just the idea to provide the facts, but having people who can speak about issues from their perspective from different parts of the world, and this can be from making sure you have more female voices in your content, making sure you have more voices. You know, if you're going to be dealing with an issue from a certain region of the world, making sure you have those voices represented in that content. That's really, really difficult, and it's something that European organizations, European media organizations are really, really not good at. And I think that's as well what you might have been getting at there, Rehab, as well. So I think that's a really, really important issue. But there will always, when it comes to sort of with fact checking, and I think it's key, again, emphasizing that sort of independence and non-partisanship. So as a media organization, as a fact-checking organization, we can't get bogged down in opinions, and often these narratives are really trying to move different opinions, or trying to silence different opinions in that sense. And so a lot of the emphasis of the work that we place and what we believe is we're not trying to change people's mind in any sense. We're not trying to make them believe one thing or another, because it's not about belief. We are here to provide the facts, and as close as we can get to the facts, if we can't get all the way. And that's really, really important. So, and hopefully if we can provide the facts, or as close to the facts as possible, based on a wide variety of sources and diversity within the sources that we are drawing from, then hopefully we can sort of counter these wider sort of disinformation narratives that, particularly with an issue like the situation in Gaza and Palestine generally, are often propagated by huge institutions and huge even governments as well. You know, there was when I remember a year ago when even Biden was found spreading disinformation about dead children in Gaza and so on and so forth. And so it can really, no one's safe in that sense. It can really get to the top of the top, and it's really important that, as Magdalene said, we get there as quickly as possible, but also as validly as possible, while also drawing on diversity as much as possible as well.
May I add something to someone's
Yes.
Basically, regarding independence and objectivity, I would like to say that as fact checkers, it is really important to overcome our confirmation bias, because we are humans, we have political views, we have an opinion and so on, but we should just look at the facts of an event, at the data, and that can be achieved, as Samuel said, by cross-checking information, contacting experts, generally looking at where the data and the arguments are.
Thank you for your answers. We have two more questions before we close, unless there's any other questions from the public. So we have one from Hala Abdullah, and she's wondering how much time does it take to identify an information and decide if it's true or false? Any of you?
I might leave that to Magdalene as the official journalist in the room. I know from our experience, I suppose it depends on the individual hoax, and some are easier than others. But I'll leave that to Magdalene to cover.
Yeah, thanks, Samuel. So basically, I cannot say that there is an average time we need to decide if a claim is false or true, or if it's worth working on it. It's really a case by case scenario, and like I'll give you an example. We might need like hours of investigating a photo or a video to ensure that this is false or this is true, and sometimes eventually we cannot like verify it, because some footage come from personal chats or WhatsApp groups or things like that, so we cannot be sure that this is not what it's supposed to be. So on the other hand, there are like small claims, like photos with with a reverse image search, we can find easily if a photo originates like 10 years ago or something. So it depends. I would say that it depends on the topic. It depends on the claim, on the specific claim. But yeah, generally, okay. If I had to say like a timeline or something, I would say that it can take you like 2 hours for an important story, a really hard story to verify. But to be sure, you have to contact sources, you have to search online on databases, and this of course takes hours of working.
Yeah, definitely. It's very case by case, and I understand that there's a process and criteria to follow to ensure that the information you provide is accurate. So thank you. And we have another question from Leonard Glitze here, and she says, who's the target audience of your work, and how do you avoid only reaching people who already are critical about claims online anyway? This is a good question. Samuel, do you want to go ahead?
I'm smiling because it's a very, very good question, and it's one that fact-checking organizations are always struggling with. How do we get to those people who don't already believe us already? And that's really, really true. So from Malita's perspective, the target audience of our work is of course the general public, but we have basically focused in on what we see as this sort of the broad majority of society, who we sort of the general term, we refer to them as the undecided, okay? So generally speaking, in terms of when it comes to disinformation, you sort of have three three groups. You have the two extreme groups. So you've got the extreme denialists on the one side who think we're communists or we're bought by the government or whatever, and they're often key sort of spreaders of disinformation. We know we're not going to convince them. They are lost. They're long gone. Fortunately, they're a minority, but we're not going to waste our time trying to convince them, because the more we speak to them, the more they're going to push us away. Okay. Then the other end of the spectrum, you have the people who are the anti-disinformation fighters, and who probably are a significant part of our audience, who consume our content and often will participate in our content, reporting disinformation, or collaborating in it as an expert, or even sharing it on their channels to friends and family. And obviously a lot of the content we produce is to help them, but we also don't need to convince them. They know that the HEART program is not going to be changing the weather and so on. Okay, but the large majority of us, and this is going to be the general sort of public, is undecided. Okay, they could kind of go either way. Okay, and unless they have the facts with them, unless they get to the facts first, there's a good chance that they could also be pushed the other way to believing a disinformation piece, not because they're inherently bad people, but because based on the information that they have access to, that's the conclusion they're going to reach. And this is again here where narratives come in really important, because it's much easier then, if you're going to feed into this narrative that explains your world much easily, you're much more likely to be pulled along, and that's the group that we try and reach with our content, this undecided group. If we can get the information to them, if we can say, hey, this is a hoax, and maybe they have seen it already or they haven't seen it, and make them go, oh wait, okay, that's not true, I'm gonna rethink about that, or delete that post that I shared. That's the group that we kind of want to get to, which having done some research a few years ago, we know that is the large majority, and that's the group that we really need to get to in order to really bring them on side and fight disinformation. How do we get to that group? Well, there's a lot of different approaches there. One of the key approaches has really been sort of heavy emphasis from our team on adapting our content to social media formats, as well as engaging with other sort of digital communication channels like WhatsApp. The establishment of our WhatsApp tip line has been really, really effective in reaching people, both as collaborators, but also in spreading our content. WhatsApp is the most popular messaging service in Spain. Something like 80–90% of people use it. So it's been a key source there. And then other platforms, particularly TikTok and Instagram, if we're increasingly developing strategies to try and engage with those platforms, developing content that is designed to have a big reach on those platforms, but ultimately is founded on well-researched journalistic content. Developing it to those channels has been really, really, really effective, and we've had videos reaching millions of views through that. And we know through there we're probably getting to people who wouldn't necessarily consume our content on a daily basis. And then a final area on this sort of social media channel is we've decided we had reached a kind of conclusion where we kind of hit a ceiling in our audience base in terms of people who read our content online and people who follow Maldita channels on the internet. We're probably not going to get much more than that, because Maldita, as a fact-checking organization, we have a very clear identity here in Spain, and people either love us or they hate us. And we've kind of, over the years, we've tried a lot of different things. We see we're not really breaking beyond that. We've got quite a large community, but it is important that we get to a wider community of audiences. And so we have set up a new brand, which has nothing to do with the Maldita name. It's called Factus. And basically it's on TikTok. You can find it. I'll send the link in the chat in a moment. And it's basically, we have a young journalist who is basically adapting Maldita content to engaging sort of informational, informative content about various different issues that are often affected by disinformation, and not going, hey, this is a fact check, this is a hoax, but saying, hey, did you see this thing in the news? Oh, well, and providing the sort of detailed information, but in a sort of those typical very sharp, catchy, engaging videos that you often see on TikTok, and really speaking to young audiences in the languages that they know. And then a final area that we've been working on is collaboration with other media outlets, particularly local media outlets. They are not prepared local media outlets do not have the capacities often to do fact checking and counter disinformation on an effective level. But on the other hand, local media outlets tend to be more trusted by audiences than larger national ones. So they're a key sort of pillar of trust within our communities. And so we are currently developing an initiative to try and provide our content more directly to them so they can republish it, quote it, share it to their audiences. And in that way, again, we're also breaking past our sort of immediate network and reaching audiences beyond our own base as well.
Brilliant, Samuel. And have you worked with grassroots organizations or civil society organizations or content creators, so beyond media, to ensure this also gets more like a real feet on the ground?
Yes, yeah, well, that's something we're doing. Working with content creators and influencers is always a tricky one because they obviously have their own platform, their own voice, and we have to be careful in how our content is shared by them. But we are always working with civil society organizations on the ground, particularly through our media literacy training programs, in making sure that these organizations are equipped to provide their beneficiaries and their communities with the resources to identify and counter disinformation. But we on social media platforms, we're currently working on a project which is focused on fighting disinformation around agriculture, and our intention is to collaborate with a number of you may have seen these in Spain, but I think in other countries they're quite popular, these sort of like agriculture farmer influencers, and these sort of young farmers who've taken to TikTok to educate people about like what it is like to live in the countryside and run a farm and so on. And our idea is to collaborate with some of these influencers to amplify some content that counters disinformation, challenging sort of the agricultural economy and things like that as well.
Brilliant. That's really interesting. We will keep in touch with that as well. So thank you, Samuel and Magdalene. I don't know if you have any final remarks to also make, maybe more on collaborations, and how do you see Medmo evolving as well in this context?
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Oh, sorry, I think I lost the connection. No, just I would like to tell the participants that we can, of course, stay in touch, and if they have any additional question or whatever, they can reach out. I can share my mail with you. Yeah, my mail with you, and yeah, and about Medmo, we'll have this. I can share it with you, and you can follow on Facebook, social media, everything. Just you can keep an eye on next events and activities of the consortium.
We will definitely follow more closely what you both are doing, and thank you so much for your time today, for your expertise. Everything you shared is really, really relevant. So I hope the audience have enjoyed as well all the sharing. And before we go, just one little presentation as well from Samuel on Migra Voice. I will let you tell us a little bit more on this in the last 5 minutes that we have before we close the session.
Yeah, sure. Yes, so Migra Voice, I don't want to take up too much more time, so I'll be quick. Migra Voice is a project that we are coordinating at Maldita. It's an EU-funded project. We're working with a number of organizations across Europe, including, some of you may know, Racif 22, which is an Arabic publication that does a lot of stuff here in Europe, among others, the London Story, Media Diversity Institute, and several other organizations. And touching on what I was talking about earlier in response to one of the questions about sort of diversity in our sources, one thing that I think many people are aware of, and that certainly we are aware of at Maldita, is that typically, especially when addressing migration issues, which are very important for the Mediterranean region, when in European media narratives, migrants are very rarely represented outside of their identity as a migrant. They very rarely appear in media media content outside of to speak about being a migrant, which obviously is important. Sometimes that's used for good and sometimes it's used for bad. But I think we can all agree that migrants have a lot more to bring to European media and European society than just their identity as a migrant. Many of them come with various diverse sources, levels of knowledge across different issues and matters and so on. And so what we wanted to do was to kind of counter this. And basically what we're doing is we're currently working to build a community of experts with a migration background across Europe. Okay, so these could be people who've come from wherever in the world and now living in Europe, and they have expertise in an issue. They don't have to have a PhD or elaborate studies, but some kind of demonstrable experience or knowledge about a topic. It could be, I don't know, climate science, like today we've been talking about, political issues, law, nutrition, any issue that you can think of. And the idea is that we'll build this community, and then we're going to open it up to the European media community so that they can come to it as a huge database of migrant expert voices to quote on and to use and quote in their content as verified expert sources. So if there's a journalist who wants to do some fact checking about Dana and they need to verify something that's related to climate science, they can come to the database, they can find a source in there, call on that source and quote them in their content as a verified expert source. What will happen though is that source will also happen to be, for instance, a Senegalese migrant living in France. And the idea here is to amplify the voices of migrants within the European media and really highlight the diverse sort of array of knowledge that they bring to Europe and to our societies, and make sure that's really more represented in the media narratives that we see and read in our news today. So and I will share this after the session as well. And what we're doing a call for today to some extent is looking for people either as migrant experts who could register in our community. And it's very easy. You just need to go to our website. I'll just share it now, migravoice.eu, and you can, if I share the screen, you go to your website here. Are you a migrant expert? Okay, you go here and then you just register by completing this questionnaire here. It's very short. It asks for some data about sort of where you were born and so on, but just so you know, that is all for private use for us to sort of build a community. What the journalists will see and what will be public will essentially just be your name and your area of expertise, and then your email address so you can be contacted. Okay, and it will only be open, it won't be publicly open, it will only be open to verified journalists who have also signed up into the community, and they can do that here. So if you're a journalist and you think this is an interesting community that you would like to use in your content, you want to not always go to the old white guy that you always call on, and you want to call on a more broader diversity of sources in your content, then you can sign up here as well, and then you will have access to a rapidly growing community of experts with a migration background that you can draw on and quote in your content. And over the coming months, there will be a number of trainings for both the experts and the journalists, for the experts in how to sort of communicate with the media, to improve your media interaction skills and help you take charge of your narrative and the stories that you choose to tell. And for journalists, there'll be a number of trainings for sort of media diversity and how to sort of promote inclusive journalistic practices as well. So there's a lot for you to draw on there. And if you're working for an organization that works with migrants, we also want your help. You can help us promote the project and engage your communities to get them to sign up to the project as well. And in return, you'll get some visibility. You'll be displayed on our website. We'll make sure that you appear we mentioned you in events that we participate in, and you'll also form part of the wider network and be able to benefit from this community as well. So go to the website, please sign up if you can. If you have any questions, feel free to email me directly at this email here, although I imagine there'll be content shared afterwards. And I will also share with you a couple of sort of promotional materials we have. So if you also want to communicate this project to your wider communities, then please, we really appreciate it. We're working right now to build this community as quickly as possible. So any help and any support is very greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Samuel. That's a brilliant initiative. So I'm happy to join and follow as well. Thank you everyone for joining today. I hope you enjoy this enriching session. As you know, this is part of our Tabadul series. So every 6 months we try to bring people together to discuss about relevant themes that we feel that are important to share and to get feedback and thoughts from everyone. So please follow also the AMWA's channels for keeping up to date on what's coming up. We also have a WhatsApp community, which is very active as well, with journalists, experts on different climate issues in the Mediterranean region, which also help us to be up to date in the opportunities, solutions, and narratives that we aim to promote and improve reporting on these matters. So feel free to also join us. And well, thank you so much for your participation, and we keep in touch. Have a really nice day. And thank you so much for the speakers for coming today. It's been really nice.